Okay.
Yep.
Tell me about your second day in the office.
My second day. So I walk into the group and you could smoke in my office at that time. And I remember walking in, there's a guy, I won't name him, but he's sitting there with his feet up on the desk, and just cigarette after cigarette, huge ashtray. And I was like, oh my God. And my boss at the time, Jerry Rice, he was well known. And I wouldn't say he didn't like female agents. He was just a little skeptical. Like you had to prove yourself. And I was the only female agent
Okay.
in that group. And the second day on the job, he told my senior partner, like, she needs to go buy dope. And I was like, oh, okay, we're doing this, right? We're doing this? Day two. All right.
Okay, y'all ready?
Okay, let's go.
All right. Can you introduce yourself for me, please?
Yes. My name is Lori Miller.
Okay. And Lori, who did you work for?
I worked for the Drug Enforcement Administration.
Okay. As a special agent?
I did.
Okay.
25 years.
25 years.
Yep.
When did you start?
I started the academy on my birthday, my 23rd birthday in 1991.
Okay. Before we get there, give me a little bit of background about yourself. Tell me about what was your family life like? Where'd you grow up? Stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, I grew up on a farm in Iowa, very rural. My dad was a corn, bean, alfalfa farmer. He also raised cattle. So I grew up on a farm 7 miles away from my hometown, very small hometown. I had like 450 people, just a small Catholic community. And I was basically raised as an only child. My parents had 5 children in 10 years.
Hmm.
10 years later, they had me. It's not planned. Not planned. And so it was a different type of upbringing. There weren't a lot of law enforcement personnel around me, not a lot of I don't know, just yeah, I mean it was a farming community,
Yeah.
basically.
Well,
So
let me ask you a question about your family.
sure.
Um, so you were kind of essentially grew up as an only child, even though you had these older brothers and sisters
Yes.
that were like 10 years older than you.
So one brother's 20 years older than me,
Okay.
and my sister is about 9.5 years older than me. And then, we've got three more in between those.
Okay.
So
And I think you said you have a pretty good relationship with all of them.
I do. Yeah. As an adult, my parents used to make sure they came home for holidays and things like that. So, they knew little Lori as I was growing up.
And
So
what did they think when you joined the DEA?
my parents, I'm sure, thought I was nuts. Um, they didn't really understand. We didn't have anybody in my family that was in law enforcement. We
Mhm.
didn't have any friends in law enforcement. My brother was an attorney. My sister then became an attorney as well. Um, but it was very different. They were very scared.
Mhm.
Um,
What did they want you to do? Was there any expectation?
not not really. And I both of my bigger even, as a woman, we had four my parents had four daughters and two sons. Um, and all three of my sisters, were professionals. One of them drove until she hit the ocean on the East Coast,
Mhm.
and she landed there and eventually went to law school. She left right after college. My other sister left right after college and drove to Dallas, and she's still here today. So I had that inspiration from my sisters to go do something big,
Mhm.
right? After growing up on a farm in Iowa. So I don't think they had expectations of me like, oh, you need to be a nurse or, be a school teacher. It wasn't like that. I wouldn't say there was any kind of they weren't chauvinistic in any regard or didn't want me to stay home and be a homemaker. But, carrying a gun at age 23, that was a bit much, and being a Fed, I mean, we didn't know any federal agents.
Yeah.
It was unusual.
When you were
Yeah.
but when you were growing up, was there a sense of what did you want to do? Was there an idea of what you wanted to do, or you just kind of hadn't figured it
Well,
out yet?
I thought I was going to be a singer, like a professional singer. I was really into music in high school and in college. I sang in the concert chorale, and I thought I was going to be something
Yeah,
big.
because what didn't you?
Yes.
You were in college. What was your
Yeah,
initial?
I was a vocal music major for the first year. And then I remember sitting in this conducting class and I was like, I don't want to do this shit. I'm not doing that, So I was like, no, that's it. Then I'm like, well, I'll do what my sister did because my sister went to the University of Northern Iowa as well. So I'm like, I'll just be a business major. Everybody's a business major.
Yeah.
But then I got a C in accounting. And I came home and cried in the chair and told my mom I hated business and I wasn't going to do that either. And, I had a soft spot for my criminology. I think he was the dean of criminology. And I don't know, something in me, it just light bulb switched and switched on. And it was like, oh, yeah, this is it. There was something about it that gripped me. And I knew that was the direction I was heading. I didn't know what exactly. I knew I wanted to do investigations. I didn't want to be a patrol cop, a street cop necessarily. I was a little bit interested in the law, but wasn't convinced I wanted to go to law school. So I was really in an exploration mode, I guess, the last 2 years of college. And I had some really great opportunities, with my sisters being one in Texas, one in Virginia. Um, I think back now, I don't know how I did this, but I think I was really ambitious in college because I decided I'm going to move to Dallas in the summer of my sophomore and junior year. And when I did that, I researched like what kind of internships can I get? And I got an internship with the Dallas District Attorney's Office.
So let me
Yeah.
ask you this:
Mhm.
those criminology classes that you said kind of gripped you.
Mhm.
Were those just random classes that you had taken and went, "Oh my gosh, this is awesome," or were they electives? How'd you end up in a couple criminology
I
classes?
think what happened was I had an intro to sociology, which was like a general ed that I had to take. And I can't remember his name, but he was the dean of the criminology department. And he must have taught that class. And that's how I kind of learned about criminology. But the sociology, like when I was in college, it was the big Nancy Reagan say no to drugs, just say no campaign. So, and then one of the famous, I can't remember who he was, but a famous NBA player, he said he did cocaine for the first time and he died
Yeah, there's a
instantly.
land bias. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't know, that era, something about it kind of got me interested in, narcotics too, a little bit. So, I don't know. He was the dean of criminology who taught sociology class, and somehow I must have, I don't know, kind of gravitated towards it, and then took an intro to criminology class, and it kind of just went from there.
So
I mean, that's like what 40 years ago.
yeah, but
My memory's gone.
but it's really fascinating when you're talking about the background of you. I mean, talk a little bit about Catholic school growing up and how big that school was that you were at.
Yeah, well, so 7 miles from my little hometown, and it was a small Catholic community. I had 8 boys and 8 girls. It was having that small of a community was rough.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, I mean, nobody did what I did. Nobody wanted to do what I did. Um,
Do you ever
growing up, I don't know anybody.
do you ever keep in
Uh,
touch with any of
oh
those
yeah,
kids?
yeah.
What they end up doing? Some of them.
It's so, I go home almost every year now. This will be the 4th year in a row for a memorial golf tournament. Um, a buddy of mine who was one of the 8 boys in my 8th grade um, hosts a memorial golf tournament for his father who died. And I go home and I see all of them. I mean, mostly men, some
Mhm.
women come. And he works for an elevator company. He's like a regional manager of a big elevator company.
Mhm.
One of my classmates was a CEO at John Deere
Oh, wow.
in Iowa. Um, I know one guy. I didn't know him well, but he was a deputy sheriff in Iowa.
Mm.
Um, God, I'm trying to think.
No, that's
Union
that.
Pacific. Like
No,
my
no, no.
girlfriend's worked for
I was
Union
just interested.
Pacific.
Yeah.
Yeah, and us, the 16 of us, then went to a big Catholic, well, not a big, larger Catholic school in another town in Iowa, about 12 miles from my farm. So we had like 9 or 10 communities, Catholic communities, that consolidated into this high school.
And
So
how big was that high school?
my graduating class had, I think, 187 in
Okay.
it. So
Okay.
yeah, it was bigger.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, we had all the sports and
Okay. Okay. So tell me about your sophomore year and ultimately how you decide, hey, maybe law enforcement's the way I want to go.
Yeah, I wouldn't say I knew it was law enforcement.
Okay.
I knew it was investigative work.
Okay.
Um, and my sister worked at a law firm in Norfolk. I'm sorry. Yeah, she worked at a law firm in Norfolk, Virginia. So I got a little bit interested in, maybe I should go the law route. Maybe I really kind of want to do more investigative work. And so somehow I landed this internship with the Dallas District Attorney's Office, and I worked like 6 weeks in a misdemeanor court and 6 weeks in a felony court. And when I was in the misdemeanor court, I worked for a criminal investigator who worked, in the court. They have them all over. Every county usually has a criminal investigator in their court. Um, and he was a retired Secret Service agent. And he'd actually been a Secret Service agent during JFK and Lyndon B. Johnson when they were in office. And after JFK got killed, his detail stepped up and became point on LBJ.
Hmm.
And he kind of said, Lori, what are you thinking? You don't want to run around on the street all the time and in a police car, do you? And I'm like, not really, and I don't really want to go to law school. But he said, what about the feds? And I'm like, I don't know anything about the feds. Tell me about the feds. So, he just loaded me that summer with all kinds of ideas. DEA, FBI, ICE, they called it ICE at the time, Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Trying to think what else. ATF. I was in Iowa, so I start researching the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation. So I had all these ideas, and I thought, this is great. And he really encouraged me to go to the federal route, not only because I would get more experience, it was better pay, the retirement benefits were great. I would get to travel, I would have more experiences,
Mhm.
and I knew I didn't want to be, you know, a cop in Iowa. I wasn't interested in that. I know I wanted to launch. I wanted to launch like my sisters had launched. And I just knew there was something bigger out there for me. I was always a risk taker, probably scared the hell out of my parents. I don't know. I just wanted to try everything.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where it started. And then between my junior and senior year, I actually did go live with my sister in Norfolk, Virginia, and I worked at the Commonwealth Attorney's Office. And I kind of did a different style of internship. I worked for the Victim Witness Assistance Program. And, that was more on the side of the defendant, um, which I wasn't quite as interested in. So I knew, oh, it's going to come out the wrong way, but like the soft sociology side of what I was learning wasn't what I wanted to do.
Right.
I was going to go be a badass, and I wanted to kick doors, and I wanted to enforce and prosecute. I knew that's where the way I wanted to go.
Hmm.
So
Where do you think that came from?
My upbringing, probably. I mean, my dad was an ass kicker. I came from a very be productive family.
Okay.
You don't sit around.
Yeah.
If he saw us sitting around on the couch, he was like, get your lazy ass. you know,
Okay.
it was always, if you weren't being productive, then you weren't doing anything at all. You were wasting time.
Mhm.
I mean, my sisters, if they hear this, they will be laughing because that's exactly how they felt. If you sat around, there was always something to do.
Yeah.
You're being lazy if you sat around. So, that's just that little voice was driving me to do something big and be productive. And I was a bit of a thrill seeker too. I wanted to get out. I wanted to leave Iowa. I knew there was a bolder life
Yeah.
beyond.
So, is it your senior year? You graduate. Is it a shotgun approach? Have you applied for everybody, or you decide? What do you think?
Yeah, I don't know if they do this now, but all those agencies came to, like, college fairs, and I would go to all the booths and picked up flyers from everybody. And I remember applying probably 6 months before I graduated, applied to all of them. It was a shotgun approach.
Mhm.
I was definitely the most interested in the DEA and the FBI, though.
Okay.
Just, I think, DEI kind of had a reputation. They were the fun, the door kickers. It was, they were the rowdies, right? I mean,
Yeah.
and yeah, seemed kind of sexy and dangerous to me, to work drugs at the time. Um, FBI, I knew I could do a variety of things in the FBI. So that was a second choice
Mhm.
too. But DEA was the first to call. I moved to Virginia after I graduated from college, and I worked in a law firm that my sister had been a part or had worked in, and just ran mail around and answered the phones. And
How long did you have to wait before you got the call?
I graduated in May. I got a call. It was November, I think.
Okay. So not too long.
Yeah, not too long. I mean, 6 months maybe at the most.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
And back then, I went to the Norfolk office and ran the PT test, which I did not pass the first time. I was nervous. My stomach was cramping, sucked at my run. I didn't pass. So, yeah, God, it was embarrassing.
Yeah.
So, anyway, he let me retake the test in like 2 or 3 weeks. I went back and then passed. So, that was good. Whew.
So you end up in 91, you're
Mm.
at the academy.
Mhm.
You're 23 years old.
Not quite. 22 when I
Okay.
got there.
So even more, 22 years old, you come from this small town, you've
Mm.
got no prior military, you've got no prior police. Is it a shock to the system with DEA's training?
Yeah, it was a pretty big shock. I mean,
So
from day one.
okay.
Day one scared the living shit out of me. You want me to tell you about day one?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So they start you off, it's like they just throw you into the fire that morning. I don't know. We had PT like at 6 or 7 a.m. And I was just exhausted, from the run and the workout. And it's January 14th, we're running in the fucking snow, and I remember I'm always at the end, and one of the instructors would be like, Schwarzkopf. My maiden name is Schwarzkopf. And at the time, General Norman Schwarzkopf, was storming Norman during the war. So, I was very well known, let's say, with that last name at the academy. Anyway, and they were yelling at me, I'm always last running, and it was terrible that morning. And I remember racing to class, putting on my combat boots. We had to wear black leather combat boots, as you're aware, black BDUs. My hair is wet, I'm sweating, and running to class. It's the first class I'd been in. I was in the back row because my last name started with an S, thank God. So I was in the back row. and everybody's barely getting settled. And I remember my boot was untied. So I was like bending over trying to finish my boot. And the class coordinator comes in. Ah, I know who it is. Can I name him?
Yeah.
Oh, Dennis Clark.
Okay.
And Dennis had a favorite saying, and I wish I'm going to remember it. He would say, "Tighten up, people, tighten up." Oh, anyway, so he yelled at me. He was like, "Miss Schwarzkopf." And I was like, "Holy shit." You know,
Huh?
I didn't have any idea what I did. I've been there like, what, 36 hours. Oh, I stood up, you know, and he was like, "I just want to let everybody know that today is Miss Schwarzkopf's birthday." And that's it. And I was like, like scared to death. And I was so relieved, all in the matter of like a half a second. And, everybody turns around and claps and all that jazz. But I was like, what in the hell just happened? Like, I was so scared. But yet, at that moment, I knew, like, oh, there is a personal factor, even on my first day of the academy, right? That is going to, it just made an impression on me. Like, he didn't have to do that.
Yeah.
He took the time to look at who he had in class. And, it's a pretty big deal,
Yeah.
was some girl from Iowa who just turned 23. What the hell was I thinking, right? First day of the DEA Academy. So it just made me think, okay, this place is going to be cool. It's going to be like, we're going to be a community. We're going to be a family. It just kind of set that in that.
How long did it take you to kind of settle in? Because for me, it was a shock to the system, and it took me
Yeah.
about a week to go. All right, well, this is how it's going to be. How was it for you?
Um, I think, yeah, I would say a week or two, probably, until I got through that routine. Because I think, maybe the first week we did three, the 3 out of the 5 mornings were firearms. And then the next week, 3 out of 5 days were, we kind of went, you started with firearms, then you did PT the next morning, then firearms the next morning, then PT. So I think after like a 2 week cycle, I kind of got in a groove. I'm very routine oriented. So I kind of knew the routine.
Mhm.
I knew what was coming. Um, I kind of settled in, I think, probably after about 2 weeks.
Okay. I think
Yeah. And you learn how to, it's basically like going back to college. You sleep in the dorm room with, there are only 3 women in my class, 2 out of 50. So we had 47 men, 3 women. And I had my own room. The other 2 girls shared, and then we shared a common bathroom. So, yeah, it was weird. And I had the thing, I had a Marine Corps boyfriend when I graduated from college, and he had just been through TBS, the basic school at Quantico.
yeah.
So I had been up there before to visit. Um, so I kind of knew the base. So I had a little bit of sense of familiarity with it. Um, so that kind of helped a little bit. I knew it's not like I went in cold and had never been on base before. So I did know a little bit about it. Yeah.
We talked about this, but describe in your mind the difference between the training that DEA was giving versus the FBI agents.
Hmm. Should I start with the clothes first?
You could start wherever you
It's
want.
so funny, because from the moment you walk in, you sense a difference. I can remember walking in and that bottom level and checking in and seeing like khaki pants walking by with like, I don't know, I think they wore red polos maybe when I was through there. I can't remember.
I think
Red or blue?
Yeah, I think the red was maybe the National Academy.
Oh, that was National Academy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't remember, but I just remember the khaki pants.
Yeah.
And then you see these guys walking through and they look like paratroopers, and that was us, of course, black BDUs and combat boots. So it was it's very clear from the beginning that our training as DEA agents was going to be much different.
Yeah.
Um, and look, they went, I know several FBI agents personally. They're great people. I I just think, I don't know, it was a little more intense for us, at least the physical and the raids and the arrest and felony, yeah, all that was
Yeah.
a little more intense.
Yeah.
It was a lot more fun. I mean, I can tell we were having a lot more fun.
Was there anything that you struggled with in the academy? Did you find one thing harder than the other?
Um, you know, the running.
Mhm.
The running was not my forte.
Yeah.
You know, I got better and better. Um, you know, firearms, I loved shooting. And it's interesting because I grew up on a farm. My brother shoots guns. My dad and brother hunted all the time. I never shot a gun before I came to DEA.
Really?
Yeah. You know, I was, yeah, I was the youngest daughter. You know, I didn't shoot guns. They didn't let me shoot guns. But,
Yeah.
so I loved firearms training. Wanted to shoot a shotgun. And I remember when I got to Houston.
Yeah.
So, yeah, no, I didn't really struggle
Hmm.
with much. I'd say PT was challenging for me, at least the running part.
Yeah. I don't like to
Mhm.
run either. So,
Yeah.
what? Said you're one of three in your academy class. Any
3 women, yeah.
three women? Yeah. Any struggles with that? Did you feel like there was any issues where not necessarily that they're picking on you or
Mm.
focusing on you or whatever everything else, or maybe conversely, maybe being one of three, maybe they're treating you a little bit better. I don't know. How did it from your standpoint?
Yeah, you know, I I never really felt a negative impact for being a woman in this agency. I know there are a lot of female agents who feel differently, and I respect that. They've had different experiences than I have.
Hmm.
Um, you know, I don't know. I don't, maybe it was my upbringing, you know, but I've always been pretty I'm pretty rough around the edges. I've got a hard shell. You know, somebody's going to give me shit or talk smack, I'm going to give it right back,
Hmm.
you know. Um it just things kind of rolled off my shoulder. I didn't take anything too seriously.
Yeah.
You know, that's one thing in life. You can't ever take yourself too seriously. You know, it's just for what reason? It's not worth it. And you know, I never felt picked on. I never felt like I was getting special treatment. You know, I actually didn't like the fact that we got to do a different kind of pull up, you know, than the
Mm.
men.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I
I
mean,
just
I
thought that
remember
was
that.
kind of,
That.
you know, it just kind of was like, really? We got to basically lay on the ground, you know, and pull ourselves up halfway. I just thought that was kind of stupid. But anyway,
That's interesting.
you know, I didn't do pull ups until 2016.
Yeah.
Then I learned how to do a pull up, but joined CrossFit and, you know, finally, and that was fun too. I mean, I'm leaping ahead, but yeah,
Yeah.
after I retired, that was fun.
So tell me how at that time you they decide where your duty assignment is.
They decided.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because I know it's
Uh,
changed over the years, but how was it for
right,
you?
right. When I went in, I was in BA 76, and we got to put down 3 choices, 3 or 5, I think 3,
Hmm.
and you had to put a division. Like you couldn't pick, you know, Norfolk, Virginia. So I picked Honolulu because my Marine Corps boyfriend had gotten transferred out there. So that was my number 1 choice. And then I picked the Dallas division because my sister lived here. And I picked Arizona. I don't know, Phoenix, I think.
Okay, no, wait a minute. You said you put in for Honolulu, but isn't that was that a separate division at the time?
I
Because
don't
that
know
was
because it's
LA.
LA.
Yeah.
I'm not sure, but I remember putting Honolulu.
Okay.
It's probably why I didn't get it.
You think?
Yeah, I didn't follow the directions. Um, yeah. So they gave me Houston.
Okay.
And at first I thought, did, did I misspell Honolulu? No, I did not. I remember asking because I wasn't happy. You know, I'm like, why not Dallas? If I'm going to Texas, at least let me go to Dallas,
Right.
right?
Right.
They're like, well, Dallas, Phoenix. We figured, the Southwest is kind of, where he wanted to go. So
Mhm.
I went to Houston.
Okay.
It's like, thank God, just don't send me to Laredo. Thank God I didn't go to the border.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I ended up going to the border quite a bit anyway, being in the Houston office.
Okay, so in 91 you get
Yeah.
to Houston. What's the first type of group you're in? Is it a general enforcement group?
General enforcement group.
Okay.
Yep.
Tell me about your second day in the office.
My second day. So I walk into the group and you could smoke in my office at that time. And I remember walking in, there's a guy, I won't name him, but he's sitting there with his feet up on the desk, and just cigarette after cigarette, huge ashtray. And I was like, oh my God. And my boss at the time, Jerry Rice, he was well known. And I wouldn't say he didn't like female agents. He was just a little skeptical. Like you had to prove yourself. And I was the only female agent
Okay.
in that group. And the second day on the job, he told my senior partner, like, she needs to go buy dope. And I was like, oh, okay, we're doing this, right? We're doing this day two. All right. So I remember the informant and my senior partner. I can't think of the name of the restaurant. It's driving me crazy. I've asked tons of agents and nobody remembers. Anyway, it was like a like a Bennigan's or like a Chili's or something. So we arranged to buy an ounce of cocaine from this kid. And he was like a kid, I mean, 25-ish maybe. And so I go into this restaurant with the informant and my partner. I don't know how the kid ever sold us dope. He did. He sold me an ounce of Coke in the parking lot. He had a green Honda. I remember that, like a two-door green Honda. Because my partner goes in wearing a fanny pack. That's what we called them in the day, right? The little stupid little black bag, and you
Mm-hmm.
whip it open, and
Yeah.
it's Velcro, and you stick your gun in there. I like my senior partner had that on. So I don't know. I mean, that's just like, a cop alert, right? So I don't know how we ever bought dope, but I did. So, I mean, he wanted me to
So how was
get it under the belt, get
yeah,
it
so
out.
how was that first experience for you?
Very, I was very nervous.
Okay.
I really was. I was very nervous, but I had a very trained and he bought more dope than, anybody. The informant had been around the block many, many, many times.
Mhm.
So he made it very easy for me. It was like I was learning from him.
So
It was great.
over the course of your career, did you do a lot of undercover?
Not a lot.
Okay.
I did some when I was on the Met team.
Okay.
Um yeah, I did some on the Met team.
Did you like it? Did you like undercover?
Not particularly.
Okay. Why not?
I didn't think I was very good at it.
Okay. So just gotta
No.
recognize it.
Yeah. I mean, I never had anybody not sell me dope, but it was mostly crack back then,
Mm-hmm.
small amounts of coke. We investigated a very violent narcotics group in Galveston, Texas, on our first Met team deployment. Those guys would sell dope to anybody. If you had, money sticking out of your pocket, they'd offer you dope. So, that was easy. But I did. I bought dope several times in that case, and I got more comfortable with it. Just not really my forte.
Were you ever hit up by other groups to, do undercover? Because personally, and there really weren't that many females that I had in my office, but in any situation I tried to get a
Mm.
female agent. Did that happen to you?
It didn't really. Houston at the time had probably one female agent per group. Um, Maybe, yeah, I think only about one per group. So I didn't. I didn't get solicited to do that much. I did more when I worked money laundering investigations years down the road too. I did a little more, some undercover work there. But yeah, that wasn't really my thing.
Okay.
No.
Can you tell me about the fake duty call?
Yeah. the fake duty call. That was probably within the first. It was within the first month or two I was on the job, I bet. And most of the group knew I was from Iowa. Grew up on a farm. My dad raised cattle. Right? They knew that. And I get a call. I was duty agent, and I didn't know how to handle anything. I would like get the call and I'd be like, yeah, can I hold on a minute? And I'd ask, how do you do this? What am I supposed to tell him? And so we had a UC room in our group where you could go close the door and make UC calls, like hard lines plugged in, and it was a UC line.
So for the audience, UC is undercover.
Sorry, yeah, undercover. Well, I didn't notice at the time the door was closed, and I get a duty call, and it's like this guy was on the side of the road. Interstate 45 runs north from Houston to Dallas. And this panicked driver called me and said, oh my God, you guys got to do something. There's a tractor trailer that overturned on the freeway and it's full of marijuana. There's just bales and bales of marijuana scattered all along the freeway and into the field nearby. And then he hung up, and then he'd call back. He'd call back and he'd say it again. He's like, oh my God, you guys got to do something. Like, there's cattle now. Cattle are coming and grazing on the marijuana on the side of the road. And I was like, holy shit. And I was like trying to talk to my partners going, what am I supposed to do? What am I supposed to do? They were like, you got to call highway patrol or something. Call state police and get some guys out there, man. You got to go. I don't know. Talk to the boss. Maybe we should roll out. And I am just like panicking. And then he'd hang up and then he'd call again. I mean, he kept calling. And all of a sudden, I heard him laughing. Oh, I want to say a really bad word right now, but I won't. But yeah, Johnny was in the room and he came out just hysterical, red as can be, laughing his ass off. The whole group was laughing. Yeah, I still talk about it. I talked about it with him this morning, actually, on Facebook Messenger. Yeah. So, yeah.
But that's probably it's probably a good sign though. You're only
Yeah.
they know that they could screw with
They
you
know that
and
they
you're
can screw with
totally
me.
fine.
I'm going to screw back.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was a good initiation. Yeah. I learned how to handle duty calls. Can tell you that.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
How about Operation the Mud Pump?
Oh, the mud pump. That was the first big case I did.
Okay.
It was some type of oil refinery equipment that was returned from Colombia. They'd returned it for repairs, is what the shipping manifest said. And we had a port of Houston, and we worked closely with ICE back in the day, Immigration and Customs Enforcement. So we worked closely with them, and this piece of oil refinery equipment was returned, and things just didn't match up. So I learned a lot on that case, from learning how to read shipping manifests to coordinating with ICE officers to setting on surveillance for a couple weeks. We did a lot of surveillance. We followed it to a warehouse, and it sat in a warehouse, and we would watch people come and go. Nothing happened. And I think eventually they deserted it, and we ended up getting a warrant, and we tried to drill into the thing. We had to get the fire department out there, and we couldn't get into this damn thing. It was huge. And it was in DEA World, actually, that year. We made the publication, and the fire department finally got into it with a diamond tip, some type of diamond tip cutter, and cut this hole and pulled out 287 kilos of cocaine.
Wow.
So, yeah, I mean, it was a good clue, obviously. ICE turned us on to that. But that was the first time, we really had to coordinate with state and locals, coordinate with the police department, use other types of resources, I guess, to, make a case whole. And it was a great experience, that case. Yeah.
Any arrests in that one, or they just never?
We did arrest a few people.
Okay.
Yes, I can't. My memory does not serve me well.
Okay.
If we ever prosecuted anybody in that case, but
Okay.
we did arrest some people. Yes, who were coming and going.
Now, was that the case that you got your first international trip on, or that was something else?
No, that was something
Okay,
else.
so tell me about the your first
Oh,
international
wait a
trip.
minute. Yeah, my first international trip was 1993. So I had been on the job 2 years, and I was going to Colombia, of all places, Barranquilla, Colombia, to interview an informant. I did not tell my parents before I went. I think my mother would have not slept for a week. Um, so yeah, we went to. I met Marty Kaplan was an agent then in Barranquilla. Worked with him, and that was a big experience for me. I remember landing at the airport and got off the airplane, and it was paramilitary. That's what it was like. Guys in machine guns walking around in green, and I was like, oh boy. I'm going to the origination of basically my job. At the time, Houston, we dealt with a lot of Colombian cocaine. A lot of black Colombians from the northern border, like Barranquilla, Cartagena, Santa Marta. A lot of black Colombians moved to Houston, set up stash houses, and received loads and distributed. So it was kind of the heart of what I was working. It was very interesting to go. And we went out to pick up this informant. We were in, I don't know, like a Ford Explorer or something. And we're driving, and Marty didn't even really tell me. I mean, I knew we were picking up the informant, but he didn't give me too many details. And I remember driving through the streets of Barranquilla, and all of a sudden he just pulls over to the side of the curb super fast. I was like, I didn't even have time to ask. All of a sudden, the back door opens up. This dude jumps in the car. Not jumps, dives. He dives into the back seat and lays down on the floorboard, and we haul ass. And I was like, what in the fuck just happened? And I was like, the informant? He was like, yeah. I was like, okay. So then we go back to the embassy, and he's tucked down in the floorboard down there. And, they do all that, moving the cameras underneath your car and all that. I thought it was super cool. Back then I was like 25.
Yeah.
Thought it was great.
Yeah.
I had an opportunity to go and pick up an informant on the street in Barranquilla. It was great. It
Yeah.
was great fun. He didn't help much, but
But it was
still
was a
it was
good
a
trip.
great
Yeah.
experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, we took a little trip up to Cartagena and Santa Marta, and it was fun.
Yeah.
Never been back since to Colombia, but it was a cool experience.
Okay, how about the 5,000 kilo case with the Navy SEAL?
Ah, yeah, that was big. We had the that was around 93 also, I think, 92 or 93. Um Another agent had gotten information from an informant who told us there's a group that was renting like cargo vans, white cargo vans, and they were taking them to the body shop to put extra shocks on them. So, we thought that was odd, right? What are they hauling around? Didn't make sense. So, we eventually got enough information and learned that an RV motorhome was coming from El Paso to Houston. And it it's so weird because, it's we learned later that the driver was a white male in his 40s, and he was a former Navy SEAL. And he pulled the RV motorhome into a house in the Woodlands. I mean, the Woodlands was a big community. I mean, I knew agents. One of my best friends lived in the Woodlands. Really nice community, and pulled the RV motorhome in there, and um, we didn't know what he was doing at the time, but cars would come and go. So we started following and doing surveillance, and um, we would follow a car to a, well, let me back up a minute. The first thing we did was actually follow one of these cargo vans. and the guy dropped it in a Walmart parking lot or a Kmart parking lot and left the keys. People would leave the keys that
Yeah.
under the floorboard. Another guy comes and picks up the cargo van and he drives up to the house in the Woodlands. I think that's how it initially started. And we were like, what's in the house in the Woodlands, And then he loaded it up, left. We didn't take the van off, but we left the van, meet with somebody else, go to a stash house, unload, and then let another car come to the stash house and leave. And I think we knocked that car off first. It might have had 10 or 20 kilos in it of coke. And we thought, oh, all right, this is good, And so all of a sudden it really grew. It grew quickly, because now you had this stash house and you still had the house in the Woodlands. And then you've got this van you're sitting on, see if it's going to be used again. So it really expanded quickly. And the second time another load came back to Houston, we'd done a B&E warrant, burglary and entry warrant, and wired the whole garage up in this house.
Oh, wow.
And had audio and video. Yeah. So anyway, RV motorhome comes back, backs in, and he starts unloading box after U-Haul box after U-Haul box, starts stacking it up. And that case, I tried to get some confirmation, but I remember it being roughly 2,500 kilos of cocaine in each load, and he did it twice. Um, the best part for me was, so he unloaded the dope on the second trip, got back in the motorhome, and drove to the nearby hotel in the Woodlands. And of course, they're like, Lori, go in. So I went in up to the counter when he was standing at the counter and he was sweating. You look like you did. And gray t-shirt, just sweating. He smelled like hell, and he checked in. And back in the day, you just showed your badge and you were like, who was that? What room's he in? And they gave it to you. So from there, we sat on surveillance and watched him, and then learned who he was. And eventually there were a lot of arrests in that case. We got people from El Paso. People had come over from Tijuana, had crossed the border. They had follow cars and lead cars, which we didn't know on the first trip. So they followed the RV all the way here. So we ended up arresting a lot of people in that case. And it was I think it was maybe the largest seizure Houston had for quite some time. Yeah.
You just mentioned something I find interesting just now, which is guy goes into the hotel and they said, hey, Lori, go ahead. Right.
Yeah.
To me, and again, this is why I like having female agents around. That's a perfect situation.
Right.
Throw them in.
Right.
Did you notice over the course of your career, there were things that maybe you could do better in certain situations that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think so. I mean, that was perfect. He didn't think anything about it.
Exactly.
I was just waiting my next turn to check in, and I was like, the guy smells terrible. Jesus, let's go. So yeah, I mean, nobody really would suspect me.
Yeah.
Yeah, there were times where it helped. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. And on surveillance, it's always, even if you went into a restaurant, you're right. Now that I think about it, I got some good gigs because, particularly when I started working money laundering cases, I would always go in with a guy from my group because it looked normal. We'd sit at a table, adjacent to the bad guys. It looked like we were a couple. We got to eat. We got to write it off. It was fantastic.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. I'm really like, oh my gosh,
Yeah, it
so many
was.
meals on this.
I know. We got a lot of meals. I ate at Houston's restaurant a lot. So, yeah, it was great, actually. It was fun being a female.
Lori, during the course of your career, I think it's fair to say you did some really cool stuff. So can you talk about, I don't know whether this was part of Operation Four Corners, but being an air spotter and air assault and doing marijuana ERED. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. Yeah, so I did. That was probably the first thing I ventured into from that wasn't a regular enforcement group. We had 6 or 7 regular enforcement groups in Houston. Then we had HIDA as well. Um, and marijuana eradication was a kind of a program in Houston. It was called Operation Four Corners. I know Oklahoma was involved, a guy named I think Bob Shannon. Um, and yeah, I was in the mindset of volunteering for everything. I was excited about learning how to jump out of helicopters and, learning something new.
Yeah.
So I did that in the summer. I think it was 93 or 94. And yeah, it was fun. We got to go to air spotter school, which is basically you get up in a fixed wing or a helicopter and you try to learn through practice what marijuana looks like, when it's nestled inside of a forest, when it's, out in the open.
Yeah.
So we did a lot of training, in the air, and then we had some classroom time and learned how to kind of learn what marijuana looked like and how to cut it down and,
So when you
how to-
say jumping out of helicopters, were you doing short haul at the time?
When I say jumping out, this was a repelling school.
Oh, so it
Air
was a
spot,
repelling
yeah,
school.
repelling
Okay.
school.
Okay.
So I think they were back to back, maybe air spotter school, and then I can't remember air assault. It was called air assault school.
Okay.
And that's where we learned how to rappel out of a helicopter, which was so awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd gone skydiving for the first time when I was in Houston, and then I think this was more fun. I liked rappelling. Yeah, I never got to use it. There were all kinds of, liability, and nobody wanted you rappelling out of a helicopter, to actually do marijuana eradication,
Right.
but they taught it to you.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was a blast. So then, yeah, we went to several fields. I remember going to Beaumont. We had a huge grow that we did. We hiked in, but then the helicopter came and lowered like the huge net to us. And then, we cut it down with machetes and everything and
Yeah.
threw it in the net, hooked it up. I mean, there was something really scary about that. I remember, that helicopter is right above your head.
Oh, yeah.
And you're trying to hook this steel. Yeah, I had a lot of help and a really tall guy on our team who led the marijuana eradication team. But anyway, yeah, it was fun. Really hot. I had short hair back then, thank God. Sweat my ass off in Houston.
I don't want to jump too far ahead.
Yeah.
I'm just asking you about this. When you went to the Seattle Field Division, did you do short haul there?
I went to a short haul training, yes, because I supervised the marijuana eradication coordinator in Seattle.
Okay.
He was in my group.
So when you did you actually get to do the short haul though?
I did. Oh yeah.
So which did you like better? Did you so for the audience,
Yeah.
short haul is you put a harness on, they clip you up to the bottom of a rope and the bottom of a helicopter, and they take off with you.
Yes.
Which did you like better, the short haul or the rappelling out of helicopter?
Probably repelling.
Okay.
Yeah. Short haul, you have to take into consideration, I was like 45 years old when I did short haul. I was crazy. I was 25 when I did
Right.
repelling.
Right.
So it's a big time. It's a big time frame.
Yeah.
So yeah, but I did that actually in Bend, Oregon. I was in Seattle as a supervisor, and I came to Bend to meet with the Central Oregon drug eradication team. And yeah, I actually went through the short haul training myself. And yeah, that's exactly how you describe it. I mean, the only thing you didn't say is you basically have to bear hug another person, some stranger from Central Oregon. I'd never thought I'd be doing that, but you bear hug a stranger basically, and you hook yourself up and interlock your arms and your legs. And yeah, I mean, it's fast.
Oh,
I mean, that's the point.
Yeah.
They take you up fast, move you fast, drop you fast.
But again, you're doing something that 99% of people don't ever get to do. So it's cool.
Right. It was awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So tell me about, so the MET team. Audience, MET team is the mobile enforcement team, which was created by, I think you mentioned Constantine, who was one of our administrators. So tell me about your experience with the MET team.
Yeah. The Met team, I mean, it makes me smile when I think about it. It was one of the best things I ever did. As an agent, I loved it.
Do you remember what the purpose was? Because I was on the Met team too. Do you remember
uh,
what the purpose was for the Met teams, though?
well, it was basically we had these repeat offenders on the state and local level, and it was just like a revolving door in and out of the jail, in and out of the courtroom, and they wanted the feds to come in with their toys and their money and their informants and experience to help state and local law enforcement
Hmm.
um, do a complex conspiracy case and kind of wrap everybody up in a nice little package, prosecute them federally so that they wouldn't keep, going in and out of the state pen or
Yeah.
county jail.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
So-
so what were some of the things that you got to do on the Met?
Yeah. Well, I did one, two, three, probably I think three deployments. We went to Galveston. That was the first big deployment. And my GS was Mike Braun. And I tell you what, Braun was very into training. We had some of the best training. I mean, we had, I'm going to forget his name, but a great guy that that taught us, advanced firearms training and, learned, learned very fast, efficient, effective moves. And, um, it was a group in Houston. Well, it was a group that we all became very good friends. And they lived together. I didn't because I lived close by, but they rented a house, in Tiki Island in Galveston. And we had a guy from Louisiana, old guy, John Chase, and all he wanted to do is cook great food, eat crawfish and make some roux and, make fantastic food. And so we had a hell of a time in Tiki Island after we were done with work, of course. But anyway, we did a great case in Galveston County. We arrested several repeat offenders. I mean, one guy was in and out, I don't know how many times, but I did some undercover work on that case. I was the case agent and worked with Galveston County Narcotics and scooped up a bunch of people at the end of it. And we went to trial, federal trial.
Mm.
It was great.
Yeah.
It was a great case, very successful. Um, and next deployment was in Beaumont. Uh, Kind of the same drill, worked with, I'm trying to think what the county is. Haven't thought about that in a long time, but same type of case. In Beaumont, we were there for between 3 and 6 months. And then we got a great opportunity to go to Atlanta. Mike Braun was really good friends with Frankie Schroyer, who is the GS of the Atlanta Met team. And we went kind of to do kind of a pre-cleanup near the Olympic Village
Mm.
and worked with the Atlanta team. And we only did that for a few weeks.
Yeah.
It was kind of fast and furious, but it was kind of cool.
Yeah.
To go in and kind of get to work before we knew, it was just going to get flooded with tourists and athletes. And yeah, it was kind of neat.
Yeah.
I still have a jacket. Still have a jacket that I bought. It's obnoxious, red, white, and blue, and from the Olympics. So it was fun. It was a fun time. And the guys during this training, I talked about this firearm training. The guys, I always felt comfortable with the Met team. I got great training, great experience. It probably led to my confidence later in my career.
Mhm.
I remember I was second in line on an entry team most of the time.
Mhm.
And, I don't know. That was exciting, dangerous, exciting, but I felt very well prepared and equipped after
Yeah.
the training I got on the Met team. And yeah, it just led to a lot of confidence. One of the days we were out on the firearms range, I had to use the bathroom and I used a porta potty. They had porta potties out there on the range. And I open the door. I hear a lot of ruckus, right? And then I open the door to the porta potty and it just hit. It hits the back of a car. And I was like, those fuckers. They'd backed a car up. They backed their G ride up and blocked me from getting out of the porta potty. You know, I mean, I don't know if they loved me or hated me, but yeah. It was a lot of fun.
Well,
Yeah.
again, I mean,
A lot of fun.
yeah, I mean, I
Yeah.
think if you're
I have a picture too. They took a picture of me. I have a
in the-
picture
in the
of
porta
that
potty?
in the porta potty. I wish I had it, but I don't.
I think it goes
Yeah,
back to
fun.
when we started, though. If they're giving you crap, I think they like you, and that's just part of how
Yeah.
it was. That's
Yeah.
just part of how those type of groups were,
Right.
especially if you were tight like that.
You know, as I talk about this, I think, I don't know, it almost seems like a crime how much, we got paid to have this much fun. I
Mhm.
mean, we did a lot of great work and it was a long hours, and 90% of the population doesn't want to do what we do,
Mhm.
but it was still a lot of fun,
Oh yeah,
you know?
yeah.
Yeah.
How about the money laundering group with Green Eyes?
Mm.
What'd you?
Yeah, Green Eyes was a big undercover money laundering operation in LA, I think it was based.
Mhm.
Anyway, we had a portion of that in Houston, and yeah, that was really interesting. We had we had to do our own SARC proposal. Oh boy, I'm not going to remember what that acronym stands for. Um, Sensitive Activities Review Committee, maybe?
I think that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So sensitive activity, it basically allowed us to launder money for drug trafficking organizations under a certain clause or under a certain law where, with the idea that in the end, we were going to seize back a whole bunch of the proceeds that we laundered undercover and arrest a bunch of people.
Mhm.
That was the premise, I guess. And yeah, we had a undercover office. We had great informants. I got to do a little bit of not undercover work necessarily, but a lot of surveillance work. There were a lot of dinners to go to and meetings with informants and high level traffickers that wanted to launder money. And my partner at the time was doing undercover. And so I would go in sometimes as his girlfriend or side piece or, whatever. And I'd go in and get to listen to the conversation. So it was great experience too. I learned a lot about it. And we got some, we'd fly places to pick up money, and that was one of the craziest things. We would meet somebody and on the corner of, I don't know, A and B, and you'd pull up next to a car and trunk would pop open and there'd be a huge duffel bag. You'd look inside and it's just filled with cash. I mean, we picked up anything from $100,000 to $1 million at one time. And we would take it to the bank. We'd sit there, an agent would have to sit there with it and go through the money counter. I mean, you'd be at the bank for hours on some of these big money pickups. And you'd walk away with your little check, and then you'd go deposit it in the undercover account, and you'd take your 3 or 4% off the top. I can't remember what we were charging at the time. And then you'd wait for instructions and you'd launder the money where the drug trafficker told us to. And we kept doing it and doing it and doing it. It was a fun operation. Yeah.
Laura, let me ask you this, because
Mhm.
I've talked to other people who worked on major money laundering cases where they're picking up money like that. What's Let me see how to word this. What's the stop? What's the
Think about how I'm gonna
what's
answer
what's to stop you? Is there any temptation when you're looking at this money, you go, nobody's gonna miss 5 grand.
Just take one
Yeah, yeah,
$10,000
exactly.
stack
Exactly.
off the top.
Exactly.
Yeah, because usually it's wrapped in $10,000 stacks.
Right.
Yeah.
So
No. You know
okay,
why?
Yeah, tell me why.
Oh, it's very clear to me. It felt like fake money.
Mm.
It just never seemed like real money. I don't know. And a lot of people were tempted. There's stories about agents all the time, right? Going down for stuff like this. No. I mean, I never had any concerns about any of my partners, anybody. I mean, we ran into ICE a lot. ICE was doing money laundering cases too.
Mhm.
We'd run into them on the street. No, never thought about it twice. Mm-mm. It just seemed like monopoly money to me. I don't know what it was.
I think, I mean, part of it for me is it goes back to what you just said about, I don't know, 15 minutes ago, which was you're getting paid to have the greatest
Yeah.
gig in the world. And why would you ever jeopardize this? This
Yeah.
is too much fun. I mean,
Right.
yeah.
I mean, I was making a great salary for the age I was living in Texas, which was relatively inexpensive at the
Yeah.
time. Yeah. Mhm.
Look, to say that you had, I mean, Houston just threw it all at you, right? I mean, you did all this stuff, and to name just another thing you did, you were at the airport group.
Yeah.
So what were you doing at the airport group?
I did the airport group for a little bit. We had a intercontinental airport north of Houston and then a little hobby airport office. I worked in both. Um, I'd say hobby was a lot of fun. It was smaller and we did the bus station and we did the train station. And, it was mostly interdiction with Houston Police Department. They had a couple detectives. And they had all the good informants. They'd worked it nonstop, and agents, we'd probably have one or two agents in the group at a time, and that's it. You'd go down to Hobby Airport for 6 months, you'd do your drill, and then you'd get back to your group.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was fun. I learned how to, I still remember walking through the train station and the HPD guy would be telling me like, okay, so look at that guy. All right, you see the bag he's carrying? Yep. Okay. He's looking around. The girl behind him, she's kind of trailing him. They taught me how to spot suspicious activity.
Mm.
And we'd go talk to the ticket counter and we'd be like, oh yeah, the guy paid cash. He's shaky, he's nervous. His hands are dirty. There's just something, just clues.
Yeah.
It helped me learn how to do a little bit of interdiction.
Yeah.
And we got lucky one day. We got real lucky and we got a kid with a backpack and it was full of, crack back in the day, cookies. And I can't remember how many we had, 24 or 48, round little, they looked like wafers, looked like wax, and it was crack cocaine. And we flipped him and he decided to cooperate with us. We flipped him, and he was supposed to take the train or the bus to Jackson, Mississippi. So we're like, let's go. We got approval from the supervisor, and we decided to do a controlled delivery to Jackson, Mississippi. So me and the HPD guy, Houston Police Department detective, jumped on the little, Cessna. DEA had, our own couple aircraft, air wing in Houston, and jumped on the plane and flew to Jackson, and we did the controlled delivery. I remember. Yeah, watched him come off the bus and arrested a couple people in Jackson, Mississippi, turned them over to the local guys, and off they went with the case. The worst part about that trip was the ride home. And my life really did flash before me. We rode that silly little airplane back to Houston and in a thunderstorm. And Texas gets really, really bad late afternoon thunderstorms. And God, I felt so sorry for the HPD guy. He was sitting there, I swear to God, he was white knuckled and it was dark and it was black outside the windows. We were flying home at night. And that little aircraft, it is the worst motion sickness I ever had. And literally, I almost thought if I had a cell phone, I didn't at the time, needed to call my parents and say, I love you guys. Because I was terrified.
Wow.
Terrified we wouldn't land.
Mm.
And we had to land at a different airport. We ended up landing at the ICE airport north of Houston because we didn't want to make it or didn't want to, for some reason, fly into Intercontinental Airport. So glad that was over. No more controlled deliveries from the train station. For me, no.
So, in addition to everything else you're doing, and I think this is a voluntary position, but you serve on the trauma team.
Yes, I did.
Why?
Mhm.
Why? And what did you do?
So the trauma team was anybody could volunteer for the trauma team.
Mhm.
You had to be chosen, I believe. You could put your name in the hat, but then ultimately, your fellow agents chose you, like, yeah, okay, we want her to be a trauma team agent and we
Right.
want him to be a trauma team agent. So, yeah, it started in Houston. And so we would respond to critical incidents, God forbid that they happened, but um, anything from a shooting to, an agent who, was really badly hurt or killed. And we would, go and offer the family any type of support that they needed.
Mm.
It's interesting. I look back on those days and sometimes I think, were we too intrusive? I felt sometimes like we forced ourselves a little bit upon families and people,
Mhm.
but the feedback we received was the opposite. It was like they really welcomed us and anything we could take off their plate was so helpful. They were forever grateful
Mm.
for the things that we offered. We respond. I picked up an agent's spouse, after he was killed in a foreign country. I picked up an agent's spouse from the airport, and brought her to his family. And, a guy died running on a treadmill. And, we went to his house and helped his wife, figure out what his benefits were, how they were coming to. She just wanted someone to sit with her while all these people from the federal government called her or came to her house and told her what was going to happen. She didn't feel comfortable doing that alone.
Mm.
And I think as a female, you brought that up earlier. I think as a female agent, sometimes we came in with a little softness.
Yeah.
It was just a different perspective, right?
Yeah.
Male agents were great. In certain situations, and female agents certainly were great
Right.
in other situations. So, that was certainly a warm and fuzzy side of DEA that I really enjoyed. I met a lifelong friend of mine that was on the trauma team as well, if another female agent. So we bonded quite a bit during that experience. We did a couple together. So yeah, I responded to another one in Houston. One of the guys in my group got shot during a surveillance and, you know, went to the hospital with him and sat there until the cops came and interviewed him. And um, yeah, so
Yeah.
it was definitely tapped into a different side of skills.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So 2003,
Hmm.
you end up getting married
I did.
to an assistant United States attorney.
Yeah. He was a U.S. attorney at the time. He was actually, I think we worked on that money laundering case for a little bit together. It might have fallen in his lap for a
Okay.
bit. Yeah. Hmm.
But as a result of that, you end up moving. And
Yeah.
you end up going to
Yeah.
the Oakland RO. So
Yes.
two questions about that before we start talking about what you did in the Oakland RO, because you ended up moving a couple times, essentially because of his job, right? Or
Yeah, I think
that's right.
the first move to San Francisco division, we both wanted to leave
Okay.
Houston.
Okay.
Yeah, he's from Houston and he was ready to leave. I was ready to leave. I'd done quite a few. There wasn't really a group I hadn't tapped into and done.
Yeah.
So, I was ready for something different. And we had some family out in the Bay Area, so we're like, yeah, what the hell, let's do it. And they had at the time DEA offered paid moves for GS-13s, which I was at the time.
Hmm.
And so I'm like, what could be better? Let's go.
Yeah.
So I actually got a paid move to
Okay.
San Francisco, and they put me in the Oakland field office. It was a resident office
Okay.
across the bay. Yeah, so we moved. We lived there for 2 years. And originally I was running around with Alameda County Narcotics. We did a lot of literally jump outs. What you can envision in the Oakland, California or division, or I'm so sorry, Oakland, California resident office is what was happening. I mean,
I can
what
only
you
imagine.
can envision.
Yeah, I can only
Yeah.
imagine how busy
Yeah.
you are.
It was crazy, but it was fun. It was a lot of fun.
You talk about tackling the guy in front of your ASAP.
Oh yeah, that was great. So we we were basically chasing or like doing jump outs, and the whole group was there that day. And I remember a guy, one of the agents was running, the kid was running from us. And Oakland, it was tiny, like I remember the neighborhood was like tiny little row houses, sort of. So you could jump. He was on the roof trying to keep track of it. It's like literally like Jason Bourne. This guy was like jumping from rooftop to rooftop, tracking the guy, hollering at us. And we were running along the street. I remember it like it was yesterday. I came around the corner. We had all our raid gear on, and Todd's yelling to me. And all of a sudden, I turn the corner, and the kid literally comes like between two houses, and we kind of just like run into each other. And off in my peripheral, I see the Crown Vic like racing down the street and like pulling up and stopping quickly right here. And this kid, basically, we just boom, and I just tackled him. It was impactful. Um, and he was down, and I cuffed him, and I remember the ASAC getting out of the car, and he was just like, wow, Miller, that's nice job. It was funny. It was good. That was a good time. So that was part of I might have done that for 6 months or so. We were running around with Alameda County.
So was the Oakland RO, was it a general enforcement group that you were part of, or did they have specific things that you were working on? Because
I only had one group.
Okay, so not only are you rolling around with Alameda County, but you're also doing money laundering, MDMA.
Not really money laundering, but we did a big MDMA case. Yeah, I guess. Yeah, it was money laundering because the wiretap we wrote was it was a money laundering wiretap. Yeah. MDMA trafficking between here and Canada. The MDMA was coming out of Canada. Ultimately, I think from China, maybe. That doesn't sound right, but coming down from Canada. It was weird, but it was coming from Canada.
Okay.
Yeah. And the money was going back. I remember doing surveillance on the South Bay. We were sitting on this. Most of them were Asian. And we did a lot of surveillance. We did some undercover buys. We had one guy in our group that was either Cantonese or Mandarin. And these guys were speaking Cantonese or Mandarin on the wire. So he was kind of our go-to guy. And that was a different style of work for sure.
You mean different style of work compared to Houston?
Oh, yeah.
In what way?
Yeah.
In what way?
Yeah, it really was. I think I had this idea that after 12 years of basically this wide garden variety of activity in Houston, that I was going to go to Oakland and, kind of chill out for a year or two, right? As a GS-13, they needed GS-13s. Maybe I would, I don't know, just kind of mentor. That did not happen. I mean, this huge wiretap case fell in my lap. They're like, oh, she's going to do it, right? So, it was kind of hit the ground running, and it was complicated. Working in the Ninth Circuit is a whole different ballgame. I mean, it was when, I don't remember when they legalized marijuana in California.
Mm-hmm.
But it was around that time. I was there 2003, 4, and 5.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, even getting the locals to work cases with you was tricky. And then we kind of, instead of working like your typical marijuana, I'm sorry, I'm kind of going in all different directions here. I'm sorry. But it reminds me because the Ninth Circuit was difficult to deal with.
Yeah.
And I remember writing this wiretap was very difficult. And writing something for the Ninth Circuit was much more complicated than writing for the Fifth Circuit in Houston. Completely different. We want to prosecute marijuana and cocaine traffickers and money launderings in Texas.
Right.
You know, you went to California and they were like, well, I don't know.
So,
Marijuana, really?
yeah. Yes.
Money laundering, really? It was an uphill battle. You know, just kind of, it sucked the fun out of it also.
Yeah.
Kind of sucked the joy
What
out of being a DEA agent. Nobody really wanted to be your friend either. I mean, on a social level too, that was a whole
really? Even though the law
whole
enforcement?
different experience.
Really?
It was weird. Yeah. It was weird.
Huh.
Mm-hmm.
What
At least in the San Francisco
yeah. Okay. So
area. I'm talking about like neighbors and friends you'd meet in social circles. You know, if you told them you were a DEA agent, it was like, you know, they turned around and walked away with their drink.
wow,
So
that's
it was different.
why it's chaos there now.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. A little bit of chaos.
why do you end up okay, so you're there for 2 years and you end
2
up
years.
you end up going to SOD, which is DEA Special Operation Division.
Yeah.
Why do you go?
Why do I go? My husband at the time got a job in Maine Justice. So as a prosecutor. So he got a great job and I was, you know, I was going to go.
Mhm.
So, luckily I got a position at Special Operations and, yeah, it was kind of, I think, you know, I think of when we moved, so we moved to Arlington, Virginia. And I drove out to Chantilly. He went into the city. So we went in opposite directions each day. But it's kind of like where we started, I guess, more of our life together. You know, we bought a house and we had a child. And I worked at SOD and I worked on it was a formerly classified project. But I was in a big group of people. There was a lot of camaraderie. It was great to be back in Virginia. You know, it's a big law enforcement community. And, you know, it was, for me, there were definitely certain sections of SOD, but my section was pretty easy lifting, which was great, you know, because I had an infant. So it worked well. You know, I kind of checked in and checked out. I worked from 8:30 to 4:30, Tuesday through Saturday.
Yeah, so really different then.
It was very different.
Yeah.
Yeah, no overtime, none of that. And you know, of course, I got bored because that's what I do, and I became the CI coordinator, the confidential informant coordinator, and I got to work with some really fun groups. Can I name those or no?
Yeah, but tell me, okay.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
Well, tell me how, because look, if you're in a division here as you're the CI confidential informant coordinator,
Right.
I understand that. But SOD, where you don't, maybe I don't know. SOD, you don't have enforcement groups. You're working with groups that are in the surrounding areas or whatever else. Why do they have an informant coordinator?
Well, because have you heard of 959 or 960, the bilateral?
Yeah.
Well, they have informants.
Yeah, okay.
We might have to cut that out.
We're gonna kind of geek out.
Geek out a bit.
Yeah.
But anyway, yes. So there were two groups in the building that had very, very high profile informants.
Okay.
So I was the informant coordinator. So I got to work with those guys. So it was fun because they were in enforcement and they had great stories because they were traveling overseas all the time.
Right.
So, you know, I felt like I still had my toe in the water, you know, because sitting in a big room, you know, for 8 hours a day, just kind of monitoring the situation wasn't that exciting. So I got a little bit more excitement, you know, being the CI coordinator.
Sure.
And then I was also the non-drug evidence custodian.
Okay, so same
I had a lot of excitement one day in the vault.
Okay, tell me the story.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, God. This is the second time I thought I was going to be trapped and feared for my life, once on the airplane in Houston and this time. So huge, huge bins of non-drug evidence and big drawers. Well, I didn't think about this too clearly. And I had the top drawer pulled out and it was really loaded down with files. And then I pulled another second drawer And all of a sudden, I don't know, I was tucked back in an area deep within the vault, and the wall, um, it shared a wall with the 959 group. And all of a sudden, the entire shelving unit, not a shelving unit, it was like dresser drawers, huge, massive dresser file drawers. It all came down. And I was underneath, stuck underneath. And I can't paint this picture because you would think, well, why didn't you just crawl out? All the drawers weren't. It all came crashing forward, and there was no way to get out. And not everybody can get into the non-drug evidence vault, right? I was the non-drug evidence custodian. Cell phones didn't work. I did have a cell phone back then, but I couldn't get out. I don't know what the hell I was going to do. And I was hollering, I was banging like on the wall because I knew 959 guys were back there. But it took a while. I don't remember how long I was in there,
Wow.
but it took a while for them to come. And I remember a huge guy, Phil Kearney, came, him and maybe Jason Sandoval. I can't remember who was around, but those guys came and lifted the thing, lifted it off of me. Yeah, that was a funny experience.
Okay, same question that I had for you about the CI coordinator. Why is there non-drug evidence for SOD? Is that where you guys are storing tapes, or what's there?
It was all for 959 and 960, the guys that actually did cases overseas.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. So.
Yeah, that was an exciting day.
So from 2005 to 2010, you're with SOD, and then you end up going to the Seattle division.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Why?
I do.
Why Seattle?
My husband at the time got a job in the private sector in his line of work, legal work. And I put in for a voluntary transfer and got it, and went to work in the Seattle field division.
So it sounds like DEA has been pretty accommodating for you and your career. And
They have. I mean, journeyman 13s don't move around, I don't think, quite as much as I did.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I was fortunate.
Yeah.
I was fortunate to be able to move, but I also did my time. I think back then you had a rule, you had to stay in the division at least 3 years before you requested a transfer. Yeah. So,
So what do you end up doing in Seattle?
So Seattle, I was in a regular enforcement group for about a year and a half, at least, maybe 2 years. And we did a big heroin. Heroin was big in Seattle, heroin and meth. And we did a big heroin conspiracy with, I think it was a Honduran group mostly. And ended up taking that case to trial also. A lot of wiretaps, a lot of surveillance. That was tough. That's my daughter at the time was 4 or 5, roughly. Right after I moved to Seattle, my husband was working full time. I was working full time. A lot of late nights. A lot of times I'd get home, have dinner, and they'd call you back on surveillance, and we'd have to drive an hour north of Seattle on surveillance for something. And yeah, that was challenging. Those years were challenging. It was tough with both of our jobs.
Yeah, I was going to say,
for sure.
So is the job getting harder once you have a kid? Like going out on surveillance late night, all that stuff. So
yeah, it was. It was getting harder.
Okay.
For sure. And I think, I mean, and I don't know, I know a lot of agents, obviously, who were fathers. For me, I guess, I had a lot of Catholic guilt from growing up. And I think I also had a lot of motherly guilt. It was hard for me to leave, even though I loved the job. I loved the excitement. I was always wanting to do the next exciting adventure with DEA. I was always drawn to that. I mean, it was hard. It took a toll on us for sure. I eventually promoted to a supervisory role. I was a supervisor of the special support group,
Hmm.
which was kind of, as everybody knows in DEA, it's kind of the easy group, to supervise. You weren't running around in the street, you weren't doing enforcement operations. Um, but I think I loved it also because it was kind of this huge diversity of people. I mean, I supervised the radio room, the firearms instructor, the marijuana coordinator, the asset removal group, the guys who did all the assets and did all of our paperwork for us, the CI coordinator, confidential informant coordinator was under me. So it was just this variety, of different activities that I had to monitor. And, I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed it. And, it gets a bad rap. I think the SSU group gets a bad rap.
Hmm.
And I get it. I get why. But you as an agency cannot operate without all of those pieces. And the tech ops groups were
Mm.
under me. So they're vital. They're vital parts of the agency. And I was grateful I got the opportunity to see a better look into each one.
Why did you decide to go the supervisor route?
Hmm, I think I always knew I eventually wanted to do it.
Okay.
Um, there wasn't really an opportunity when I was at SOD, and this was really the first opportunity I had to do it. Um, my marriage it was getting difficult. Um, at that time, my husband moved out of state for a job during that time also, so I was kind of single parenting. I had a good nanny, thank God, but I was doing a little single parenting, trying to be an agent and a supervisor at the same time. So
Mm.
it got awfully muddy. And but I think it was probably easier. That GS job in particular was easier than running around on the street till midnight.
Yeah.
I mean, it was fairly regular hours. So
Right.
for me, promoting made my life a little bit easier. Uh-huh. So
Do you think? And this doesn't have anything to do with male, female,
yeah.
whatever else, but supervisor wise, do you think? You think it was easier to manage an SSU unit having rather than a regular enforcement group?
Oh, I think so.
Yeah.
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 You have less gun carriers, you got less problems.
Yeah. Exactly.
But you do have a lot of, you got administrative folks. Everybody's got a different issue.
Yeah.
So yeah, I like it. It rounded out my career in a way that gave me a lot of diverse experience, and I think it probably carried into my current profession in that I feel fairly confident in talking to a wide variety of people, from a guy sitting in a jail cell to, a CEO of a big, a rock drilling company, let's say.
Yeah.
I do private investigations now. So I think I learned how to talk to a variety of people, not just defendants
Hmm.
and not just agents, which has helped me later in life. Yeah, for sure.
Okay. So let's talk about what you do now. So what your private investigative
Mhm.
shop? What do you do?
So I've been licensed in the state of Oregon since 2017, and I do exclusively civil work. So most of my clients are plaintiffs' lawyers, so I do mostly personal injury cases. Anything from motor vehicle accidents to literally a guy slipping on the ice coming outside of a brewery, and fracturing his hip or something. We got a lot of breweries in Bend. So, that's mostly what I do. I also have a contract with Deschutes County. I do their civil litigation cases. Those come, yeah, I might get one big one a year. Bend's a very small town. I mean, it's probably got 100,000 people in it now. It's an outdoor enthusiast
Yes.
venture playground, basically. So it's not huge.
Yeah. So for the audience, Ben
Yeah.
is Central Oregon.
Mhm.
What's the name of your company?
Magnify PI.
Okay. Okay.
Mhm.
And you also, which I find super great,
Mhm.
kind of a side thing that you
Total side
started
gig, yeah.
when COVID hit?
Yeah.
What'd you start doing?
So when COVID hit, I decided I was going to go to culinary school. We actually have a culinary school in Bend. It's associated with the Central Oregon Community College. It's called the Cascade Culinary Institute. And they've got a culinary side, a hospitality side, and a baking and pastry program. So I went through their baking and pastry program and I loved it.
I just think it's so
Yeah,
great.
it's awesome.
Just something totally
It's
different.
awesome.
And how did when people when you tell them about your former career, how did they react?
Yeah. They kind of freak out. I mean, I literally just went and interviewed with a woman who owns a kitchen store in Bend. And my resume, I've dumbed it down. But, the first part of my resume is, that I was a law enforcement officer with a federal government agency. I don't name it. But, and then I own my own private investigative firm. And then, I went through baking and pastry school and I want to teach baking classes at your kitchen store, please. They're just like, I mean, I remember the look on her face. She's like, well, I certainly don't get a lot of resumes like this one, Lori. You have a quite diverse background. So yeah, I do. But I think there's a theme, you see it from the beginning of
Yeah.
my life, really. I'm coming from Iowa and I become a DEA agent, and Houston, I basically do every group possible. I want to get as much experience and I want to do all the fun stuff.
Yeah.
The only thing I regret not doing in DEA is going overseas.
And why
I wish I had.
why didn't
kind
you?
of.
Why do you think you did?
I think the timing of it all just didn't really line up. I think I'd put, I was kind of a dum-dum, I put in for, European spots, which
You're only going to get those if
Houston agents don't really get European spots. So I didn't get them. And then, I met my husband at the time, and it just, our life took us in a different direction.
Right.
So yeah, I never did it again.
Mhm.
I thought about it. We thought, some crazy stuff. I think we thought about going to Hong Kong once. And
well,
but,
Braun,
yeah.
Braun, at some point, Braun could have probably helped you out.
Yeah, Braun was instrumental in getting me an SOD. So
Mhm.
I gotta give that to him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so Lori, 2 last questions I
Yes.
always ask. Tell me how law enforcement affected your family.
My family.
Yes.
Let's see. I think my immediate family, I have to say I was fortunate because my husband I'm not married anymore, but my husband at the time had, he had a bird's eye view into my life because he was a prosecutor.
Right.
So he kind of knew. He knew the drill. He knew what it was like.
Mhm.
And he was very pro law enforcement. And my family too. All of my family really supported me in my career. Once they kind of figured out what it was, um, they supported me wholeheartedly. I think my daughter, um, when my daughter was old enough to kind of understand what it was, was probably around the high school age, and I think her friends, well, she'll tell you to this day, yeah, my friends are scared of you, mom. Even though I was kind of the cool mom, but her friends were still a little scared of me. They knew what I had done and they knew I was an investigator now. So, um, but they also really kind of relied on me and trusted me. They knew if the shit hit the fan at some party out in the woods,
Mhm.
they knew I could deal with it, I think, or I would respond differently and in a more protective manner, in a more, take care of them, get them out, get them what they need kind of way.
Yeah.
So I guess I hope that answers your question about that. My daughter would frequently, I always gave her a little tip when she went out to the woods because bonfires are big out in Central Oregon.
Mhm.
Kids go out in the woods. They're not supposed to, but they light bonfires and they get big and they have kind of loud parties out there. And that always made me nervous, when she was going to go to a bonfire. And but I told her, I said, well, when you drive out there on the dirt road, I said, make sure you drive past the party, circle all the way around, pull past all the cars that are parked in the wrong direction, and face back towards town. Face towards town. So if shit hits the fan, and certainly it did one night, there was a shooting at one of these parties. Some kid brought a gun and shot another kid in the thigh. And, they jumped in their car and they got out of there. And as they left, cops were rolling in, so I don't know. It's just kind of funny. I taught her a few tricks.
Yeah. So,
So,
okay. So that's going to go into my last question
Mhm.
for you then. Can you look back to when you started DEA, when you were 22 years old, to
Mm.
even now? Did being in law enforcement affect the way that you see people and how you
Oh,
deal
yeah.
with society? And okay.
Yeah. Still to this day.
Well, I think the story about your daughter is interesting,
Yeah.
but even
Yeah.
to this day, what do you
It
still
is.
kind of?
I guess I just, I don't know if suspicious is the right word, but I'm just always a little more cautious, maybe. Um, I think I have decent intuition. Um, I listen to my spidey sense, that gut feeling is always there. I'm a little more discerning about who I meet. Um, uh, you know, I always sit with my back to the door. I mean, facing the door. If I go into a restaurant, it's weird, but some habits are really hard to break.
Yeah.
I mean, I still qualify every year with the local police department so I can carry a firearm if I am in a sketchy area doing surveillance. So, I would say that I'm always little more curious about what's going
Hmm.
around me. And sometimes that's good, I guess. Sometimes I feel like I don't have a lot of patience either. I don't have a lot of patience for, bullshit and, shenanigans. I'm just like, yeah, no, we're not doing that. To my daughter or something like, yeah, no, you're not going there. So I feel like I have a little bit of a shorter fuse, but I know what potentially can happen. And
Do you think that you were maybe more of a protective parent because of your background?
protective.
Just worried about, I mean, just because law enforcement sees stuff that nobody else sees.
Right.
So do you think you have that, maybe you as a parent versus another person as a
Mhm.
parent, do you think you were a little bit more strict in what your daughter can do than that parent would?
Yeah, I think so. I was. And, I'm not sure I pulled in the boundaries tighter. She had a decent curfew. She had I gave her a fairly, I think, long rope. But I taught her what I knew. And I taught her, like, what they're doing is not a good idea. And let me tell you why X, Y, and Z. So if you do go, you need to not set your drink down. Don't ever pick up a drink that somebody else, open your own can. So I had some heightened sensibility for sure about drug use, for sure.
Hmm.
Um, and I think more than like being more strict, I just educated her more
Mm.
to be able to figure it out on her own because I think she's a very wise child. And I think she passed on a lot of what I taught her to her friends, and they didn't always like it all the time, and their moms didn't know as much and they were less restrictive, maybe. But it was more about teaching her, look, this is what can happen. So I'm going to teach you how to navigate that situation.
Yeah.
And she's wiser for it.
Yeah.
Mhm. And she's a great kid and super successful
Did
and
she,
doing well in college. So
and I'm assuming she has no desire to go into law enforcement.
she hasn't mentioned that.
Okay.
She hasn't mentioned it.
Well, let me ask you this: if she had,
She does have an inquisitive mind, though, and she's wise, and she's. So we'll see. We'll see.
well, let me ask you this then. I can assume, looking at your career, you look back on it very fondly.
Mhm.
If your daughter came to you and said, "Mom, I'm thinking about doing a career in law enforcement," what would you tell her?
I would tell her to sit down and let's have a chat. Let's have a long chat first. But you know what I could tell her is that if you do it, you're going to have a family and a lifetime of friends forever.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't tell you just in preparation for this how many people I reached out to that I still can reach out to,
Yeah.
and we remember funny stories and we laugh. And I mean, it brings a smile to my face. Um, it really is. And even in my small hometown, it's one of the reasons when I moved there, I did join a CrossFit gym because a lot of law enforcement do CrossFit, a lot of fire department do CrossFit. And without DEA, I felt like I needed something that was going to bond me and have that camaraderie with first responders.
Mm.
And it did. It filled the void.
Yeah.
Yeah, it did. I don't do much anymore. Bad shoulder now. But yeah, it was great. If she does choose that career, I would support her in it. Certainly help her navigate, through some things.
Yeah.
But yeah, I still think, and now in particular, we are respecting our law enforcement and fire department and police officers again. So that's a good thing.
Yeah. Lori, thanks for the interview.
Yeah.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Enjoyed it.